Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Good morning. Welcome to the DMZ, everyone.
Uh, I'm worried going into this that we're going to end up on the exact same topics that we always end up on
Well,
because
and
Trump, you
that's
can't quit Trump.
we can't, but I think it's also complicated by the fact that there are, I don't want to say new, they've been around for a while, but there are additional blogging head shows that have sprung up over the last year or so that start to cover some of the ground that we're covering here.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe I don't know if we have unique fans who just watched this show or if they're gonna have already heard about what we're going to talk about. But we were here first, so we're going to do our thing. But have you noticed
Okay.
that, Bill? By the way, I like these other shows. I'm a fan of the Blogging Heads catalog, and I do listen to them.
But we're in the election season, and so I think everyone's mad at us when we talk about presidential politics, and it's 2013.
Yeah.
You guys take a break? As if you want to. We could talk about Parenthood all day long, but I'm not sure you'd watch that show. But now it's election season, and just Trump is just good fodder. No matter where you come from, he's good copy. Gives good quotes.
But we're not just gonna talk Trump today. I mean, we had our extensive pre-show interview, and we're gonna hit some other topics too.
I know. I mean,
but I guess we're gonna start.
Everyone's on tenterhooks waiting to hear what we have to say about the Export-Import Bank. I know that, but I want to save that. I want to save that till later. Let's get our spinach out of the way with Donald Trump, and then we'll get to Exim Bank.
Right. Okay.
Now, are you surprised that after Donald Trump insulted all the veterans, anyone who's ever been in combat, by saying John McCain is not a war hero because he got captured? And that seems to have done very little, if nothing at all, to stem his rise in the polls. I guess there are some polls where nationally maybe he's got a slight lead as opposed to a big lead, but he's now leading in both Iowa and New Hampshire, where he wasn't before. And in the last New Hampshire poll I saw, his lead was pretty large. So are you surprised? Or were you saying all along, like, hey, everybody in the right hates John McCain, so why is anybody shocked at all here?
So I don't know. I mean, I still think that it mattered. Okay, so even though Trump has arguably gone up in the polls since that happened, I think that was a turning point. I think that was the moment when all the other Republican candidates learned that you can get away with attacking Donald Trump and that you can seize the moral high ground on the right, at least, and do that.
But who has got an advantage by doing that? Who has got a piece of the polls? Until you go after Trump, you just feed the Trump beast. It doesn't help you in any way.
Well, look, I disagree. I think that Rick Perry, disclosure, my wife works for Perry for president. I think Perry has benefited from going after Trump and doing it, and I would say the most eloquent and substantive way. Others have tried to do it, like Lindsey Graham's video of him destroying his cell phone. After Donald Trump gave out Lindsey Graham's phone number, was clever, but it's sort of like empty calories. Like at the end of the day, all it shows is that Lindsey Graham's willing to poke fun of himself. But I think Perry has gained by virtue of having Trump as a foil. But look, my ultimate sort of point about Trump is that this is someday we're going to wake up and the Donald Trump campaign will have collapsed on itself. And I believe it will be a matter of accretion. At some point, they'll reach a tipping point. Now, maybe it's when Donald Trump's lawyer says that you can't rape if you're married. That's not rape. Or maybe it's when he attacks POWs for being captured. I mean, it's unclear to me when the tipping point will come. But I don't think that it's going to be because of that instance. I think that you're going to be able to add these things up, and at some point it just becomes too much. So I still say the comments about McCain will be a part of his undoing eventually.
No, we had in 2012 these boom and bust cycles with fringe candidates on the right. Michelle Bachmann, doesn't drool on herself in the first debate. Says Barack Obama's a one-term president. Everyone goes nuts, and she wins the Iowa straw poll. But then she doesn't seem to know how to have a second act and maintain that momentum, and it deflates. Herman Cain gets some buzz with 999. Then he gets hit with these sexual harassment charges. He stumbles a lot of foreign policy questions, and that sugar high dissipates. Newt Gingrich attacks the debate moderator. The conservatives love the media being attacked. He does it right before the South Carolina primary. He wins that one, but he doesn't have any kind of grassroots operation on the ground in the subsequent states. He doesn't have a second act beyond attacking media debate moderators, and that dissipates. So here you have Trump. So you might well say, well, Trump's going to be the same deal. And look, I don't think Trump's going to be the nominee. I think he certainly has a ceiling. But he does seem to know how to sustain media interest in a way that these other candidates didn't. 20 years of jerking the media around, it has its benefits. So the McCain thing happens. What does he do? He immediately goes to the border and generates fresh news for himself that pushes that out of the way. He gets hit with this rape charge that folks hadn't seen. The Daily Beast dug up an old biography of Trump from the early 90s that had information from his divorce proceedings from Ivana Trump, where she accused him of rape, although she then backtracked from that later on in the divorce proceedings. And Trump's attorney says there's no such thing as marital rape, which is a factual inaccuracy. Donald Trump himself distances himself from his lawyer on that in that regard, but then he gets Ivana to release her own statement saying that that she wasn't raped and Trump would make an incredible president. So he seems to always have something in his back pocket to get over those problems. And then when other candidates attack him, like he went on a tirade on Scott Walker's governance in Wisconsin. Like he seems to lack the reluctance to tear down fellow Republicans. This guy might be the nominee someday. I might want to be his VP. Tim Pawlenty was doing, Obamacare for a day and then threw that overboard when it seemed like that was getting too hot. Trump just can't wait to tear down everybody else and have that be a media narrative that puts aside any kind of scandal being thrown.
There's something refreshing. There's something refreshing about that. He's not playing the game. He's not trying to pander to the other candidates. He's all in, with the exception of the sort of interesting relationship with Ted Cruz. But otherwise, he's leaving it all on the field. He's not afraid to go after anybody. And Bill, I think you're exactly right about something. And that is, I do not think you can discount the fact that even though Donald Trump's never been elected, he has been a public figure for decades. He has learned how to manipulate the media, how to garner press. And with the exception of Newt Gingrich, who likewise has been able to stay relevant for decades through the force of his intellect and political libido, I think that Donald Trump is a much more dangerous candidate than Michelle Bachmann or Herman Cain. For that reason, they were political neophytes. Even though Bachmann had been, a congresswoman since 2006 or something. Donald Trump had much more experience, much more politically savvy, at least in terms of garnering press attention. So, I think there is an analogy to what happened in 2008 and 2012, but it's also different. I mean, Mitt Romney was always going to be the sort of, heir apparent candidate, the likely nominee. The one person who could have potentially taken out Mitt Romney was Rick Perry, and obviously that fell apart. Once Rick Perry's done, I think Mitt Romney is essentially the presumed nominee. The other challenges were sort of perfunctory. I mean, they were a little bit fun. Newt had a good time. But I think it's a different scenario this time. I think that it's much more wide open. So I think that the analogy falls apart there. And I think that Trump is much more politically savvy than Herman Cain or Michelle Bachmann.
Now, I think we both agree that Trump won't be the nominee. In my opinion, he has a ceiling. It's probably around 25%. Maybe if he really consolidates the right, it would be 30. And look, 30 can win primaries in a lot of situations. But I think even in that optimistic Trump scenario, where he was doing that well and sustaining that leading up to the initial votes, the Republican establishment would be in such a panic that they would run to Jeb in a big way.
I think that has to be the hope, right? That has to be the hope that people, at some point, people would be so afraid that Trump is going to win that they would just rally around Jeb, which is great news for Jeb as well.
Right. That's why I think Jeb has an interest in pumping Trump up. And also we have no evidence that Trump is investing in real get-out-the-vote operations the way Gingrich did not and couldn't capitalize
he may not
on
need
the poll numbers that he had. That's sort of a wild card. Is he quietly hiring the right people, or is he just worrying about the media having all air war, no ground war?
Does it matter? Does it even matter for Donald Trump?
I think it matters in caucus states.
Okay.
You need to get people to show up. I mean, this is the Howard Dean problem too. He is all air war, no ground war, and when push came to shove, his people didn't show up. So I think so there's that scenario where that Trump crowds out the other conservative candidates, but can't actually deliver on election day, and that's good for Jeb. The other scenario
would be sorry to interrupt. That would be really ironic for the Breitbarts of the world who are propping up in the Rush Limbaughs and the Ann Coulters. I mean, Rush hasn't endorsed Trump, but he certainly isn't speaking out against him. I mean, it would be really ironic for them if that prevented Ted Cruz or even Scott Walker from winning the nomination.
Now, the other scenario would be that, like Bachmann and Cain and Gingrich, that he's peaked too soon, people get bored. He can only bash immigrants so much. He doesn't have other issues that he can turn to maintain attention. The Trump souffle, flattens out, and then we're back to a free-for-all on the right where anybody could get back in it. Do you think that is more likely than the Trump carries this through for several months, Howard Dean style?
So I'll say something that political prognosticators are loath to say, and that is I do not know. This is uncharted territory as far as I'm concerned. It is impossible to predict what Donald Trump will do because he's unlike any politician. And if he gets out, you could argue that if he gets out of the race a month from now, that he's helped the Republican Party. I mean, this past week, we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but Trump overshadowed the fighting going on in the Senate over the Export-Import Bank, over defunding Planned Parenthood, over the highway bill. Ted Cruz isn't happy about it because he would love to be getting attention for picking a fight with the establishment. But you could argue that Trump is doing a service to the Republican Party by distracting from much more, substantive problems or problems that might be more likely to linger once Trump exits. On the other hand, what if Trump sticks around for another year it's impossible to know. You can't buy him off. You can't scare him. You can't intimidate him. You can only hope, what is it? You can't stop him. You can only hope to contain him. I don't even think you can hope to do that. He is anything but in fuego.
Well, I mean, you say you don't know what the Trump trajectory is. I think if you are a Walker or a Cruz or a Paul or a Huckabee or a Perry or anyone else who's not Jeb, you need to figure that out, because if he's going to tank on his own, you're probably better off hanging back and letting him do that, because anyone who attacks him directly seems to get kicked in the teeth. But if you're not confident that he's going to fade on his own, you better do something to take him out, because he's getting in your way.
Well, we've got the debate coming up a week from Thursday, August 6th, I believe, from beautiful Cleveland, Ohio, where the governor of Ohio, who enjoys a pretty good approval rating, will apparently not be in the debate. And we'll see what happens there. But until then, I would challenge. I do think that Rick Perry has done a good job of standing up to Trump and has marginally benefited from doing it. Now, maybe Trump goes after him in the debate, and we'll see if he can rise to the occasion. That could be very good or very bad for Perry, depending on how he handles it.
I can't wait to see Donald Trump's oops quip when Perry goes out of the debate stage. It's tailor-made.
I mean, I've alerted my wife to just clear out of the house Thursday because this is going to be. I mean, I think that there's like a 5 o'clock debate of like the B team, the kids table as they're calling it.
Right.
It's going to last like an hour and a half, and then I don't know when, maybe 9 o'clock. I don't know when the other debate starts. But Thursday night, pack a dinner. Pull up, crack open a beer. I mean, this is going to be. And for fans of political spectacle who've been deprived since the last cycle of debates, I mean, this is go time.
I mean, and this is why I feel like, and for every going on a digression here, everyone complains that the campaigns take too long, and we hear the same talking points over and over again. It's a waste of time. It's irritating, and why can't we be like England and Great Britain? Haven't been a 6-week sprint. If you had a 6-week sprint, Donald Trump would be probably president by now.
I agree.
You want to vet. You want to vet people. And so it's great that Donald Trump is good fun now, and maybe get you to watch the debate. But you want to see people put through their paces, and so you get the crazies. They can burn off before election day.
I don't get why everybody. Look, we're the best country. Let's just be frank about it. And I think our system, which, has served us well. And I'm talking about stuff that just kind of sprung up organically. It wasn't in the Constitution. I mean, our two-party system, I think, serves to diminish the power of fringe candidates and from seizing power. And I think that you're right. We hand-wring about the money. And as George Will talks about, we spend more money on Halloween candy than we do on presidential elections. And people complain about how long it is. Well, that's a feature, not a bug. I mean, I'd rather have Trump peaking now than peaking, come next January or something. So I'm with you, Bill. American exceptionalism all the way. Take that, liberal media.
Now, but let's not spend all our time on Trump because he's crowding out others who are trying to draw attention to actual issues. You have Ted Cruz. Here's a guy. This is a guy who's a grandstanding expert. Goes on the Senate floor to draw attention to this issue with the Export-Import Bank, which expired last month, but it provides loan guarantees to exporters and helps them compete with other countries' exporters because other countries subsidize their exporters too. So it helps us put our exporters on a level playing field with the rest of the world. Chamber of Commerce.
Can I talk about that a little bit before we go into the first part?
Sure.
All right. So I don't know. I don't have a strong feeling on this, but I just want to, maybe you know the answer to this question. But let me set it up, okay? Mm-hmm. So on one hand, we have this Export-Import Bank that actually makes money. I think that they collect on like 95% of the loan. So basically, if a company wants to do business in Ethiopia or something, presumably they can't get a loan from a normal bank, from Wells Fargo, or maybe it's that the Ethiopian government feels more comfortable dealing with the federal government. But for whatever reason, in order for us to compete, for our companies to compete, theoretically, in foreign countries, they need to get loans, and the only way they can get them is through this Export-Import Bank. Apparently, though, it makes money. It doesn't cost the taxpayers any money. It certainly does line the pockets of companies like Boeing, helping them profit. Doesn't cost the taxpayers any money, even though we're on the line for the loan guarantees. But my question is it because Ethiopia feels more comfortable dealing with the American government? Why is it that if these loans are being held up and returning money, why doesn't Wells Fargo want to make the loan? Why do we even need the Ex-Im Bank? I'm unclear on that. Obviously, a lot of conservatives are upset about it. My guess is it is a handout to big business, but it doesn't really cost the taxpayers.
I assume, and I could well be wrong about this. I assume that it's going to be a pretty favorable interest rate coming at Exim Bank, whether versus going to a private bank. You know, there's going to be a stability and a security to that. It's not going to fluctuate. You know, I mean, right now it's a low interest time, but it's not always going to be a low interest time. So you have everyone says businesses want certainty. You are certain to get this at this rate all the time, and you can then plan. You can then have a business strategy going forward for several years. And it's not just about the Boeings. I mean, people focus on the Boeings, but they might get the lion's share of the loan guarantees. But there's still lots of smaller exporters out there that take advantage of it too. So
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. The other thing I would say is I think from a national security is the wrong word, but maybe it's not. I mean, if China and other countries are going to be doing this, do we want foreign sort of developing nations to have China or other countries who have other interests investing in these countries and have America be kind of locked out of the system? So it seems to me that we probably want to be in that game strategically as well. I assume that's part of the calculus. I mean, you could argue that this is a conservative thing to support, but you could also argue it's crony capitalism.
Right. I mean, there's definitely a libertarian populist argument that this is crony capitalist, that this is the government picking winners and losers. This, you know, it may not cost you the taxpayer may not cut a check at the end of the day, but you are still subsidizing certain companies and not subsidizing other companies. Right. And that leads to you know, and so the insiders win, the outsiders lose. So there's that issue out there. So that has divided the Republican Party as of late. I mean, this used to be a pretty non-controversial thing, but now you have the Tea Party folks really targeting it. Bernie Sanders is a anti-crony capitalist arguer on the left, but in the vote that just happened in the Senate, he was the only one on the left to vote against it. All the Democrats voted for it. You might get some more anti-votes on the Democratic side in the House, but still, by and large, Democrats have been supportive of this, and Obama's supportive of it, as is the Chamber of Commerce. So,
well, what I'm curious about is why it became the cause du jour. I mean, it seems to me that, like, farm subsidies are arguably a bigger problem. I don't know why all of a sudden this became... Now, look, I don't know where... I mean, I guess I would be inclined to think this is probably a bad idea, but I'm kind of open to it. But it is interesting to me that somebody decided, maybe the Club for Growth, whom I love, they do great work. Somebody, though, decided that this was going to be the cause. And it's unclear to me exactly why.
Well, I mean, the Kochs are against it. Freedom Works is against it. I believe Heritage Action is against it. So I don't know exactly who was the person to prioritize this. I'm sure someone, I think you know, Tim Carney at the Washington Examiner. This has been his hobby horse for a long time.
And by the way, since you mentioned him, let me highly recommend a piece that Tim Carney wrote in the Washington Examiner about the whole cruise thing that you're going to talk about. I'm trying to find the title of it, but he wrote a piece that really, the headline is skewed. It's something to do with about how Mitch McConnell is leading the Republicans in the wrong direction. But it's actually a very even-handed piece that looks at the motivations of Mitch McConnell and his goals, which are essentially to return to, you know, sort of order and to show that Republicans can govern and that the Senate is not impotent, and to return to regular order. Those are Mitch McConnell's goals, and those seem to be fairly noble goals versus Ted Cruz's goals. So there's really a conflict of visions over here ultimately. And Carney's piece, although again I feel like the headline somewhat misrepresented it, was very even-handed and just demonstrating that really McConnell and Cruz are at cross purposes. They're behaving perfectly rationally based on the fact that they have entirely different goals in mind.
I lost you for a bit there.
Sorry, I just kept talking. So.
Okay. Well, I want to get into the Cruz bit in just a sec, but just to wrap up your question, sort of why is the right doing this, and maybe forgive me for having the left explain the right, but my sense is that those on the Tea Party right that really were animated against the TARP bailout and wanted to have a follow-up issue to show that this new Tea Party right was not your grandfather's Republican Party. This is not the pro-corporate conservatism that you think of. Here's a chance for us to show our anti-corporate bona fides by going after this agency and saying this is an example of how the left partners with corporations to screw the average guy. And they've taken the argument pretty far by actually letting the charter expire in June. So Cruz, seeing this opportunity, everyone in the scrub needs something to help them stand out. Cruz's go-to is grandstand on the Senate floor. McConnell had agreed to have an Exim vote after the and I forget which issue it was back in the spring. The fast track vote that was part of the deal to get the fast track Dems on board was to hold the Exim vote, and he also and allow that amendment to happen during the highway bill debate going on this month. Cruz goes on the Senate floor to charge McConnell with being a liar, actually uses the word liar to say that he cut a secret deal with Democrats to jam the Exim Bank through. And McConnell's argument is this is not a secret deal. I'm just saying they get to have a vote, and they have the votes. That's not me backdoor dealing. That's proper Senate process. And so Cruz, thinking he's got a golden opportunity to buttress his narrative that he is the singular force breaking up the insider game of Washington. He turns the Senate floor speech into an ad, defeat the Washington cartel. I don't get the sense that that's breaking through to the average person because the Trump noise is so ear-shattering.
Yeah.
And XM Bank is still kind of an obscure issue for folks who don't follow these things closely.
I agree. The Exim Bank is a very sort of Byzantine topic.
But he really ratcheted, by calling McConnell a liar was sort of DEFCON 1 inside Washington. How dare you do that? But I just don't think it's rippling out beyond that.
Well, I think Trump, as you mentioned, I think Trump is overshadowing everything and sucking up the oxygen. That would have been a huge story had it not been for Trump and some other stuff happening. Also, I think it's a little baked in the cake. I mean, the people who think that McConnell and Boehner are evil and need to be fired thought that 2 weeks ago. So that's baked in the cake, right? And then there are people who think, yeah, they probably lie and they're probably, but like that's sort of what the leadership does. Like they are who we thought they were. And I don't have expectations that Mitch McConnell is going to be, a great, ideological fiscal conservative. He's like, his job is to sort of cut deals and get things done. And that's what the leader does. And I'm not surprised by it. I do want to ask you about the lie thing, because it's a little bit unclear to me. Do I believe that leadership lies to people from time to time? Probably yes. But on the other hand, it's not like 99 other Senate, like nobody's joining Cruz and saying, yeah, that's right. Even Mike Lee, as far as I know, isn't saying, yeah, McConnell lied to us. Now, that could be because all the other Republicans are scared and they don't have the guts or the courage that Cruz has. Or it could be because the lie was made exclusively to Cruz and nobody else, there were no witnesses. Or it could be because Cruz is now lying. I don't know the answer to that. Do you have any sense, Bill, of who's right or wrong here?
I mean, I doubt Cruz was outright lied to. I think they're just interpreting the facts differently. What constitutes a secret deal or what is just the normal operations of Senate negotiations. I don't feel like we don't know what happened here. We know it was talked about that there'd be an Exim vote coming out of the fast track deal. And it's not like, and McConnell has said, look, I'm trying to have as many amendments on the floor as possible for how we do business here. And I'm not going to block an amendment that has majority support.
Yeah.
That's not lying. That's just how the Senate works. And Cruz is choosing to interpret that as a lie because McConnell's saying it's not a secret deal. But I think as far as like Senate etiquette is concerned, I think people who engage in politics for a living always say, your word is everything. If you don't have your word, you have nothing. You can't function as a legislator if people don't trust what you say. And so to call someone a liar is to say you can't do business with that person. Now a guy in your own party saying you can't do business with the leader of our party in the Senate because he's fundamentally an untrustworthy person. And so Cruz alone saying that he's not getting backup, and so for Cruz, to the extent he has any interest in being an effective senator, he's pretty much sabotaged that because you now can't do business with him without getting called out if you have any interest in conflict.
I mean, again, going back to that speech he gave, I don't think it worked. I think it was overshadowed by Trump. And he's talking about things like filling the tree, which I don't think most people connect with. It's like the old story about this girl on the campaign trail asking Bob Dole about some issue, and he said, "Yeah, that bill's in markup right now." I mean, I don't know that jargon resonates. It was too convoluted for me, let alone Joe's six-pack. But I think this does speak to the sort of larger societal issue, too, which is the lack of respect for authority, for institutions, for tenure. I mean, can you imagine somebody calling the majority leader Lyndon Johnson or Speaker Sam Rayburn a liar on the floor of the House or the Senate? It's unfathomable.
Right.
And what hell would have been brought down?
Well, they had more
that.
tools of retribution at their disposal. Yeah. We don't have earmarks anymore. You can't take away things from your district anymore or your state anymore if you do stuff like that. So congratulations, Tea Party. You've ended insider retribution. Well,
it's funny, the unintended consequences, right? I mean, it seems like getting rid of earmarks is just a really smart and positive thing to do. But the unintended consequences of doing so...
it's harder to maintain party unity. It's harder to grease the wheels for other types of legislation, which is part of the reason why the Tea Party wanted to do it. You get less legislation if you have less grease. But where there could be retribution for Cruz is you will never get a bill with your name on it passed in this body again because you're not getting any co-sponsors. And if you have a good idea, I'll let somebody else take it and get their name on it. But
will McConnell go to that level? That's what I'd like to know. It seems like whether it's Boehner or McConnell, there's some minimal punishment doled out, but by and large, they've not really gone out of the way. A couple guys kicked off of like Ag Committee and stuff in the House a couple years ago, but not a lot of retribution as far as we can tell. I mean, Cruz, they deprived him from offering an amendment, I believe.
Right.
Will he never offer another amendment? I doubt it, right? Don't you think it'll just sort of go back to normal? Yeah, next week's episode. This is like one of those TV shows that we used to watch before the golden era, where like next week it starts off and Cruz is back in the Senate cruising again.
He might get to offer them. People might not vote for him, or other people might get a similar amendment that gets more votes than his. He might get that sort of high school level. But and that to a normal senator that might be disconcerting. I doubt Cruz really cares because I don't think he's in this to be a career legislator. He's not trying to get bills passed. That's not his thing. He's trying to block stuff. He's trying to build up his bully.
You don't think he wants to be a career legislator? What do you think what do you think his plan B is? He wants to be president. And if he can't be president, I think he wants to be in the Senate. Do you think he wants to go to the private sector? I mean, do you think this is...
I assume he wants to, like everybody else, get the Fox News show, get the radio contract, get the book deal, be the true believer.
Got the book deal. He's got the book deal.
I mean, Jim
book is
DeMint
out.
went to run Heritage. I mean, he might want to run an organization outside the Senate like Jim DeMint does. I don't. Nothing he has done from day one suggests a guy that wants to get comfortable being in the Senate and make lots of friends and get things done. So that's a hard guy to pressure because he's not interested in the same things that other senators are interested in.
Yeah, well, it's a Donald Trump phenomenon all over again. Let's talk about a guy who is interested in being in the Senate and being your president, Rand Paul.
He doesn't want to get off the ballot for a Senate. He's not. Marco Rubio is go big or go home. He's not running for re-election in the Senate. Paul has went through all those machinations to make sure that he could change Kentucky law and be on the ballot for both things. He doesn't want to lose the perch that he has in the Senate. I mean, that's sort of like with Ron Paul, having that the congressional seat was a source of credibility for leading the movement he wanted to lead. And for a time, Rand Paul seemed to be the conservative candidate, going back to, I think, 2013, but now he's down the pack with everybody else. So where did Rand Paul go wrong in your view?
Really falling on hard times. There's this Politico piece inside Rand Paul's downward spiral. He was once a serious contender for the White House. Now his campaign is fighting over what went wrong. This details a campaign in disarray, a campaign that is fighting against itself. Money is not good. I think, though, my take has always been, and I've been consistent on this, that the problem with Paul is trying to be all things to all people. And I just think it was untenable. I think that, he also, to the degree that he had a niche, it was sort of non-interventionism, and I guess Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the rise of ISIS made that uncomfortable. So then he sort of squished out and distanced himself from that and became more of a mainstream conservative. But when he did that, then he gave up what made him special, that he was different. And I want to recommend, there's this guy named Tom Woods that I like. He's been on my podcast. I mean, I don't agree with him on a lot of stuff, but he's a libertarian, and he has a really interesting podcast, the Tom Woods Show. And he had somebody from, I think it was antiwar.com on his podcast a couple weeks ago. And Tom Woods is a huge Ron Paul friend and fan, and they were very, very hard on Rand Paul, basically arguing that he should have stood for something. Like, if Rand Paul had been a hardcore libertarian candidate and had given his fans and his supporters what they wanted, he would probably be sort of occupying a Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump status right now. Instead, you try to please everybody, you end up pleasing nobody. And so, look, I think Rand Paul's problem was trying to be all things to all people. It was always untenable. You can't keep everybody happy. You can't, what is it? There's that old line in Texas, if you hang around in the middle of the road, you get run over. Nothing in the middle of the road but yellow lines and dead armadillos. I think that's what happened to Rand Paul. I think that he should have doubled down on his brand and own it. And if it works, if the moment is right, you are president. If the moment is wrong, you are in the Senate. And you're in the Senate as the sort of the Barry Goldwater champion of a cause.
I basically agree. I'd only just put a slight wrinkle in that. I think he could have doubled down in a way that was still different than his father. I mean, I think the promise of Rand was that he wasn't going to be as Looney Tunes as his dad. He wasn't going to bring up the 1953 Iran coup at any given moment in debate, no matter what the question was. He had a sense that he needed to have some recalibration. He had to play to the broader electorate. He at least had some sense of that political reality that his father did not have, and I think that was a healthy thing for him. But what he didn't do is pick his spots and plant his flag there. He would always kind of inch into an area and then worry about the backlash and pull back. Oh,
totally. Even or that happened certainly, but other things that happened would be he would make strides to reach out to the African American community, which might anger some people on the right. But okay, we've decided we're going to be an inclusive candidate. he would make strides to, to reach out to criminal justice reform, things like that. And then he would undermine that by taking some other position that would, utterly undermine what he just did. I mean, I can't even cite an example, but it happens all the time.
Well, he was not out in front. He made a lot of waves when he wrote a piece for Time magazine after the Ferguson killing, and talked about excessive, government power and how that needs to be restrained and whatnot. Now, since then, the right got all mad that the victim in that case was not, that the police officer in that case had more justification than the activists were saying in the subsequent report. So this became an example of, media frenzy and, unbiased media and whatnot. And after that, Paul got gun shy. I mean, he should have been raging after the South Carolina shooting. He should be raging about what happened to Sandra Bland. I mean, he could be talking about, even if the circumstances in some of these cases are complicated, there's still an argument for Rand Paul to make that excessive police force, government force is uncalled for, even if the person in charge, did something wrong, that there are better ways to handle this.
Totally. There's a rule in politics that says, if I'm going to get the downside of something, I might as well get the upside of it. So I think this comes down to branding. I mean, I hate to sound like this is just business, but own your brand. You have a brand. And Rand Paul, you're going to get tagged as a supporter of X because you're on the record supporting it. So own it. If you're going to get the downside of it, get the advantage and be like, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. People want to believe in something. I mean, that's part of the reason that Donald Trump, let's just say, is doing so well. Now, the things he may believe in, the things that he may be doubling down on might be bad, but at least he believes in something, and at least he's doubling down. And I think Donald Trump I think Tom Woods is right. I mean, I think that the energy that's going toward people like Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump in a different world could have been channeled toward Rand Paul, but you got to inspire people. I mean, Ron Paul did that. If you could have what Ron Paul had, and then, as you said, maybe make it mainstream it a little bit, you would really have something.
Now, speaking of being all things to all people, Hillary Clinton is being very careful what she says about the environment. She had a big climate plan, a big renewable energy plan that was rolled out earlier this week, but she is being very circumspect on matters like Keystone and fracking. And just today, while there's been a lot of defense of Planned Parenthood in the Democratic Party since these undercover videos have come out, she had more of a nuanced take to the New Hampshire union leader just today, where she said, I've seen pictures from them and obviously find them disturbing, talking about pictures from the videos. Then goes on to say, Planned Parenthood for more than a century has done a lot of really good work for women, cancer screenings, family planning, all kinds of health services. And this raises not questions about Planned Parenthood so much as it raises questions about the whole process that is not just involving Planned Parenthood, but many institutions in our country. If there's going to be any kind of congressional inquiry, it should look at everything and not just one organization. So she's not trying to, dump on Planned Parenthood, but it's definitely more of a all things to all people kind of statement than some other Democrats have been making. So, while I would say, look, this is sort of bad for Rand Paul that he is not sharpening his brand, is getting lost in the pack because he is trying to be all things to all people. Hillary starts at a different place, being the front runner by far, and thinking about the general election. There is a concern that she is overly calculating, and that got her in trouble last time round. So might this lead her to lose her perch again? The other argument is that she has that perch. It's not really that threatened, so she needs to think about the general election a lot more, and therefore there's less risk for her to play the all things to all people game. I don't know if you think she's doing the smart thing or the overly cautious thing right now.
Well, first, let me just talk about the larger issue. I think that this is really smart on the right. I mean, the people, Lila Rose and whoever the guy was who did this video, this is really smart politics. And in the past, I have been somewhat skeptical or critical of attempts to do gotcha journalism and sort of this guerrilla journalism. I think this is really helpful to the pro-life cause, and it speaks to the fact of if we're talking about, remember, recently, the topic when we've talked about abortion, we've been talking about things like transvaginal ultrasounds and legitimate rape, which obviously cut against the pro-life cause. Now we're talking about something, the process of abortion, which I think is sort of inherently unseemly, regardless of how you feel about the issue. And we're sort of focusing on the late-term aspects of it, which I think also skews toward the pro-life cause. So I think this is smart politics in terms of the pro-life movement, changing the framing of this issue and back to a side that has traditionally helped conservatives and Republicans. In terms of Hillary Clinton, so I think that I don't know the answer to whether or not this is smart. It implies that she believes that this issue still benefits conservatives. That the country is sort of a de facto pro-life country in the sense that mainstream Americans, do not like abortion. However, the safe, legal, and rare line works, and that she believes that that's still where the country is. One could argue that that Obama has prospered by throwing out those old assumptions from the Clinton era, which was frankly, the Clinton era was always under the Reagan era, in my opinion, the Reagan paradigm. And I think that things have changed in the Obama era. So the question is this baggage that Hillary brings from sort of coming of age in a time when the political paradigm was different? Or is this an act of wisdom and a move for her to kind of gain centrist votes? We don't know the answer to that yet. I don't know the answer, but I think it's possible that that this is smart, and I think it's possible that it's her sort of more evidence of her being tied to the Bill Clinton world, sort of political strategy.
There's sort of two competing narratives of Hillary. One is that she is the consummate fighter. She's not going to be naive like Obama was. She's not going to believe that hunky-dory bipartisanship is possible just with a nice speech. She's going to go into the trenches. She's going to fight and scrap for what she's going to get. And the other narrative is that she is so battle-scarred from the 90s and so shaped by the defensive-ness of the era that Democrats had in the shadow of Reagan, that she trims her sails too much. And after the Obama experience, even less necessary than maybe it was necessary at the time of the 90s. Now, your point about where the abortion discussion is going now is interesting, because in the 90s, and I've written about this too, the anti-abortion movement was a lot smarter. They focused on late-term abortion, which
partial birth abortion was the line, and that was very effective.
That was extremely effective. That put Democrats on the defensive, and even though Clinton at the end of the day vetoed that legislation, a lot of Democrats voted for it and eventually passed under Bush. It put a lot of red state Democrats in very uncomfortable positions, and then since then, I've argued the anti-abortion movement got too greedy, and they went into areas that were not as politically advantageous. The transvaginal ultrasounds, fighting contraception, Obamacare, that gave Democrats the upper hand. They were able to run in a far more aggressive platform in the Obama elections. So it might be smart on Hillary's part to say, look, even these are bogus videos. They're selectively edited. They're not really selling fetus parts. This is donations. It's not profiteering. She might still be saying, look, it doesn't look like that. The images are more powerful than words. So I don't need to be on the wrong side of this for those North Carolina, Ohio, Colorado swing voters. Let's be very careful with our language so I don't get on the wrong side of those folks.
One man's so like, there's an argument that says when you've got the enemy on the run, keep running and always be on the attack. And that's a very masculine, that's what sort of the extremes always want, right? Mm-hmm. And there's another side that says, well, don't get out over your skis. Don't get cocky, because you're gonna, to keep going with different metaphors. I mean, you're gonna get to the end of the limb or whatever. You're gonna go too far. And those are like tactical, strategic questions. They're not ideological. But that's really what we're talking about in the case of the abortion debate and Hillary as well.
Now, in the matters of the environment and also Wall Street, she was asked about Glass-Steagall the other day, and she gave a very nuanced answer that Glass-Steagall wasn't really the source of the market crash. There's other things that we need to look at, other ways we can regulate Wall Street better. She didn't quite come out and say I'm against restoring Glass-Steagall, but she certainly downplayed its importance. And with Keystone, she has this big climate plan. It's very heavy on ramping up our renewable energy generation. To have more solar and more wind, and let's have ambitious goals to get there. And it's going to create jobs, and it's going to prevent asthma attacks. So there's lots of messaging in there that's designed to avoid divisive issues. It's not jobs versus the environment. It's we can do all this at the same time. But when it comes to Keystone, she's asked about it point blank, and she says, well, it's part of the State Department process, and that process is ongoing, and I'm not going to comment until that process is finished. And so either it's going to get finished while I'm still running, or it's not going to be finished, and I'm president, and then I'll have to finish it, and then we'll talk about it. So, so the question becomes, is this being politically calculating, which is bad? It seems like Hillary is soulless and lacks all conviction. Or is this Hillary embellishing her brand as the uberwonk? I know how government works better than all of you. So I'm going to focus on what works. I'm not going to get bogged down in things that are not ripe yet. And when you come at me with your simplistic attacks, I'm gonna outwonk you to death, and people are gonna respect that about me, that I bring a level of experience and expertise here that no one else can match.
Well, so I think it depends if the media lets her get away with it. I mean, and then the public lets her get away with it. My take is that if you're running for president, you have to have a position on important issues, and the Keystone XL issue has been. It's not a new issue. We've been talking about this for close to a decade now, at least it seems like it. And I just don't know that you can be her and not have a position on it. But if the media lets you get away with it, then I guess you can. And
that's so, folks on the left, she needs to take a position on Fast Track. She needs to take a position on Glass-Steagall. She needs to take a position on Keystone. Well, maybe she doesn't. She can very well.
I mean, to me, look, I think it's disqualifying of her that she doesn't. And I think it's irresponsible and inappropriate of her not to take a position. But I'm not going to vote for her anyway. I mean, the question is, will the media, hold her feet to the fire, and will the public care? And if they don't, then maybe the smart move is to do what she's doing.
I mean, I think this is all a question of, Democratic Party electorate for the moment. And there obviously is a faction of the party that is more fervently left, that is extremely put off that she doesn't take clear positions on these things. And Bernie is now owning that faction. But I do think that the party, I think the center of gravity of the party has moved leftward since the Obama era, partly because of Obama's actions, partly because of how the economy tanked under Bush, and then the Iraq War fared under Bush. But there still is, I think, a more robust appetite for pragmatism and compromise in the Democratic Party base than the Republican Party base. And so
I agree.
Clinton flashing her pragmatism is not as off-putting as that might be when it happens on the right. It off-puts some, but I don't think it off-puts the majority of Democratic Party voters, and it gives her a lot of latitude.
I agree. I don't know how long that'll last, if it'll last indefinitely, but for now, I think you're right. I think it benefits her probably.
I mean, she got in trouble in 2008 with immigration. She got caught in a debate dancing around the driver's license issue, where it really seemed like she was having it both ways. It was extremely inelegant, and that just sort of let the floodgates pour of people's reservations that she just was not a strong general election candidate because she was not elegant. I mean, everyone dances around stuff at the end of the day. It's a question, how well do you do it? So there's a bit of a question there. Sort of, how good is she at doing that? I would argue so far she's doing it better than she did in 2008. But that's where Bernie, if he's going to have a shot, he's got to find a way to catch her in those moments and make her sound like a politician and not a competent government official.
She does, though. And again, granted, I'm biased, and I've said this is nothing new, but the woman, she just seems like such a phony and so uncharismatic. I think she's gotten worse. She's become a worse politician over the years. Like, I don't, there are a couple things happening right now, and this sounds horrible to say, but I feel like if Donald Trump wins the nomination, or if Hillary were to defeat somebody like, say, a Marco Rubio, either of those scenarios, I would really be ready to say, okay, I'm going to step back from politics a little bit, because it's insane. Given if the public, first of all, if the Republican Party nominates Donald Trump, which I don't think is going to happen, but it's plausible, that would be disconcerting. And then I think if you had a choice between sort of a young, inspiring, fresh, smart, thoughtful conservative and a politician like Hillary, and the American public went with Hillary, I also think I would be disconcerted as well. Yeah, so, America, don't let me down here. Don't let me down.
We should probably wrap up. Just on the charisma point, I do hear this by Hillary a lot, that she's a flat speaker, she's not inspiring. I think one, that there are people who are inspired by her for different reasons. They're inspired by the perseverance aspect and the glass ceiling aspect of her candidacy. But we should be reminded that the charismatic people don't always become president. Richard Nixon was not charismatic. George H.W. Bush was not charismatic. You can make an argument that Jimmy Carter was not charismatic in '76. It's a bit more complicated. I mean, he was seemingly had kind of a low-key charisma earlier on that kind of faded as the campaign went on. Now, all those people opposed folks who also were not charismatic. Sometimes you get two non-charismatic people. At the end of the day, right. You got to choose between the two of them.
Yeah, it's not like Michael Dukakis was setting the world on fire either.
Right, and so if it's Jeb Bush or Scott Walker, those folks are not super charismatic folks either. So that may not be the currency that the race hinges upon. Hillary's trying to make, I think, better this time around than last time around, making her strengths work for her. She is at her best talking policy, not giving soaring rhetoric. And so she's putting herself in situations where she gets to do that as much as possible and give you that sense of competence. I think so. To the extent that her candidacy is going to have legs in the general, that's where it's going to be, not in making her something that she isn't.
I don't understand how anybody could support her, but again, I'm not. If she's counting on my vote, then she's in trouble. So.
Yeah. Okay. Do you understand anyone could have supported to Mitt Romney or George W. Bush in 2000? Or John McCain in 2008?
Yeah.
Richard Nixon. You understand the Richard Nixon appeal?
Well, who was Nixon running against in '68? I mean, it wasn't JFK.
No, but Humphrey was the person who brought the Democratic Party into the Civil Rights era. He wasn't a shabby figure. He had a lot of history behind him, but the party was divided, and there was a lot of backlash to LBJ on civil rights in Vietnam, and charisma wasn't what mattered right then. That Nixon offered a sense of providing order to a chaotic time.
I don't want to. I know you got to go, but there are people who are boring but authentic. But I don't think Hillary strikes me as both uncharismatic and phony simultaneously. So that's how she rubs me. That's the messages I get when I watch her speak. So it's an interesting combination for someone who's incredibly successful.
Not that I am agreeing with your assessment, but there are plenty of phony people that get elected president.
Right, but they don't seem phony. No, but they don't seem phony, right?
Nixon didn't seem phony.
I guess the sweating kind of wasn't a good thing. All right. Well, point well taken. She's Richard Nixon. I can see that. Hillary is Nixon and very well may win, as Nixon did. Finally.
We'll leave it there. Good to talk to you, Matt.
All right. Pre-order my book. Pre-order my book,
Yes.
Too Dumb to Fail, for the love of blogging heads. Thank you, Bill. And you got anything to plug?
I got nothing to plug. It's all you get the plug today.
I get the plug.
Take
Okay.
care.
Good talking to you, and we'll see you all later next week.
Thanks. Bye-bye.